Stop with the hello, hello, hello. Everybody knows who's there.
Well, there's only one person so far.
Who's there?
Us.
right, let me make sure you got this. Here we go. Rabbi Karsh. All right, you want the video on?
Yeah.
Okay, the video's on. Then you have to put it over and you have to hold it because you have to be able to see that.
Hello,
Video.
guys. All of us are on except for Rabbi Karsh.
Oh,
but,
okay.
I'm on.
Oh, you're on. You're on. Hello.
I'm on. Hi.
Hi.
I had my battery died, and it just took a long time for it to reboot or whatever, start over again. Now, Liz, why is Liz saying, is Liz on? She just texted me.
Yeah, we were talking that you weren't on yet, but she'll come on. She'll come on. Okay.
Okay, I'm sorry, it was just took forever for it to to whatever go on again. But thank you for your patience. Also, I'm unfortunately I'm going down to St. Louis to visit my father. That's not unfortunate, but it means that we're not going to meet tomorrow or Wednesday. I'm sorry about that. I try to make it as annoying as possible. And this is just to give everybody much more reward for being a part of the class. It's all designed for that. Okay. Lafum Tsara Agra, according to the suffering is the reward. That's what they say. Okay. In the last class, we were talking about stealing. Stealing itself has negative commandments associated with it. Don't steal. But it also has a positive commandment, which is if somebody did steal, it's a positive commandment to return what they stole. And I just wanted to make a general observation that about owning things. That this is a big part of how human beings move through life. It's a big, especially in our Western culture, in which acquiring objects is a big part of our day and our lives. But it's sort of interesting to explore the relationship between humans and objects, and also from like a biblical perspective. There are like in the Adam and Eve story, there is taking the fruit. Eventually it's going to be eaten, so it's not something they're planning on keeping with them and traveling with. But the object itself was, when it talks about Chava, her first interaction with the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, she's contemplating the object itself. It's pleasant to consider. She touches it, she eventually eats it. But you could argue that if you're tracing the relationship between people and objects, that it deserves mention. Eventually, when Chava describes giving birth to Cain, she says, I have acquired she calls him Cain because the actual language has to do with acquisition, to acquire something. And there are commentaries who maybe subtly are exploring the usage of that term, because it's a sort of funny term to use when it comes to birth, but there are that kind of person-object relationship with their children is sort of interesting. And then you have Cain and Hevel, the relationship between a farmer and his product, which is challenged by giving of it to God. Did he give the best of his land? Did he not give the best of his land? Hevel seems to have given the best of his sheep. Cain, it's suggested just from a kind of subtle reading of the verse, doesn't seem to give the best of it. And as we move forward, Avram is said to have a lot of property, things he's given by Pharaoh. That seems to be an issue between him and Lot, his nephew. The shepherds of Lot and the shepherds of Avram are contend with each other, and it seems to have something to do with the fact that now they have lots of things. And it's just, even in the Noach story, when it identifies Hamas, that many of the commentaries suggest that Hamas, in its narrowest reading, is theft, and that theft characterized the sinning of the people in the time of Noah. Even in Sodom, where it's not clear from the text exactly what their sinfulness was. I mean, we do get a story that's meant to indicate that they wanted to rape the angels. So that's a bit of an indication. But the Midrash expands on some of the wording in the text to suggest that it also had to do with their relationship to their material things, that it was a materialistic place, and that they had a very strict notion of what's mine is mine and what's yours is yours. The Mishnah in Pirkei Avot says that the attitude, what's mine is mine and what's yours is yours, is either the average attitude, but there's another opinion that it was midat stone, that it was the characteristic of the people of stone. So anyways, this which something we take very much for granted, which is that we have objects, that we acquire objects, our relationship to objects, it's something that for many people is a big part of their lives. And it's just sort of interesting to explore it from a biblical perspective. And when you're learning something about stealing, it highlights it for a moment. Okay, so I just wanted to make that observation. And so does the mitzvah of tzedakah, which we also read last time, which was that he commanded us to give charity and to strengthen the weak and to ease their situation. So the Rambam here is explaining to us what makes something charity. So oftentimes there's a person who recognizes their own need and has approached somebody else to help them. And that's the context for, it appears, for the discussion of charity in Leviticus, in the Torah portion of Bahar, and in chapter 15 of Deuteronomy, that you have somebody who's clearly in need and most likely has already approached you. So you are commanded to give to that person, to strengthen their position and to ease their situation. The Hebrew here, again, this is a translation from the Arabic, is lechazek hachalashim, to strengthen the weak, ulaharchiv, to widen, to give them, because oftentimes when people are feeling pressure because of money, they describe it as tight or constricted. They feel tight or constricted, and when you relieve them of that, there's a sense of expansion. There's a sense of widening or a sense of expansion. So, and then he had pointed out that he had, I mean, I don't know if he pointed it out, but he's quoting verses that use that language of your brother and your brother shall live with you. Often, that's how it's often characterized in Bahar, that this is your brother, this is a close relative. We talked last time about the fact that there is a hierarchy. When you're considering who to give to and how much to give, you're expected to consider a kind of hierarchy, that you have family, and then again, the Rambam and others expand from there. So you might have family, then you have community, then you have people that are coming from without, from outside the community. We would add the distinction between that there might be times when you consider Jew as opposed to Gentile Jewish causes. You are asked to give to all people, Jew or Gentile, for sure on a rabbinic level, but there still might be a hierarchy of consideration for that. I think the Jewish community itself continues to judge people. I've heard people, irregardless of their religious affiliation, Jewish people who still have an assumption that Jewish causes should come first. And when they see somebody like put their name on something like Marquette University, which is a Jesuit university, but they don't give money to the Federation, that's when you'll hear people like sort of grumbling that there is some kind of assumption that Jewish causes should come before Gentile causes. And then we spoke about how this really becomes a test of wisdom to decide to whom and how much to give. Because if your consideration is that you want to strengthen the weak and ease or widen their situation, you're going to have to make some kind of judgment about whether what you're doing actually accomplishes that, because that is your goal. Ultimately, we are cautioned in other texts to recognize that God takes care of everybody, and you're just making an effort. Nobody's expecting you to solve the world's problems on your own. God is there with you, but you are sort of mentored to understand that God might use you as his vehicle for helping the world. So I am, by the way, I hung out with Mordechai Becher yesterday, my friend Rabbi Becher, and we were schmoozing, and he told me of a conversation he had with Rav Moshe Shapiro. Rav Moshe Shapiro quoted a verse from Tehillim. They were talking about outreach and Jewish outreach. So Rav Moshe quoted a verse from Tehillim, which was in chapter 72, I think, verse 18 in Tehillim, which is Baruch Hashem Elokim, blessed is the Lord God, Elokei Israel, the God of Israel, Oseh Niflaos Levado. He does wonders by himself. And he seemed to imply that a person's religious life, their religious affiliation, their connection to God is really between them and God. God, it's and when it comes to that relationship, God is the one who's working on the relationship. So Rabbi Becher asked him, if that's the case, then what's my role as an educator who's often brought in to cross the bridge between the religious communities, various religious communities? And so Rav Moshe said in English to him, your job is to stay out of the way. Try not to mess things up, in other words. Anyways, so in a certain way, this is the case with tzedakah as well, charity as well. Ultimately, again, when you're working out the theology, there's lots of statements that all get woven into a fabric. But the mentoring that many get is that ultimately God's running the world. He's even running these kind of details. He's looking after the poor. He's looking after other people. We are encouraged to be involved, but ultimately we are not relied upon to solve the problem. The problem is if you have empathy, you feel the pain of the person who's reaching out to you. And when I'm in pain, one of my first thoughts is relieving that pain. And so even if the pain is coming from empathy, I want to relieve that pain. And so I might be thinking in that way, how can I just stop the suffering? And that's not terrible to think that way. It might be very good to think that way. But at the same time, to have the humility to recognize that I'm not actually in charge. I'm just supposed to be perhaps a vehicle, God's vehicle for doing it. There was a famous Hasidic story. The story is that a man approached the Apter-Rav. The Apter-Rav was a Hasidic Rebbe from the 1800s. His name was Rav Avram Yeshua Heschel. He was, of all the people that are called Avram Yeshua Heschel, they're named after him, including Heschel. So the Apter-Rav, a Chassid came to the Apter-Rav and told him that he's marrying off a daughter, and he doesn't have money for a dowry. He doesn't have money for the wedding. He needs money. So the Apter-Rav said, I'm going to send you to one of my Hasidim. He's a wealthy man, and I'm going to send a note, and he'll take care of you. So the Apter-Rav wrote a letter, sealed it in an envelope, and he sent this guy to this Chassid. And he told the guy, spend Shabbos with him, and then after Shabbos, give him the letter. So the guy travels to where this chassid is, tells him that the Abderov sent him. The guy, this other guy, the wealthy chassid, treats him with lavishly as somebody who was sent by the Rebbe, by the Abderov. And then after Shabbos, they meet in his study, and chassid number one hands the letter to the wealthy chassid, and the wealthy chassid opens it up, he reads it, and he pales, and he stammers, and he says, this is a lot of money he's asking me to give you, and I'm not liquid. I know it seems like I would have that kind of money, but I really don't have access to that kind of money. I can't give you anywhere near that. I'll give you such and such amount. So the chassid number one said, well, the Rebbe told me you were going to take care of this, and he sent you that letter. And the guy says, there's nothing I can do. So the chassid number one says, well, if you can't help me in the manner that the Rebbe asked, then I'm just going back to the Rebbe. So he goes back to the Rebbe. He tells him what happened. Rebbe is not happy with chassid, wealthy chassid. He sends him to another chassid. He says, I want you to go to this guy. He's not in the same league as far as wealth goes, but he'll take care of you. Same thing happens. He spends Shabbos with this other chassid, and after Shabbos, they meet in the guy's study. He hands the guy the letter from the Rebbe. He opens it up. He reads it. He also turns a little pale, but he says, what can I do? If the Rebbe says I'm supposed to give you this money, I'm going to give you the money. So he gives him the money. The first chassid is able to give the dowry and make the wedding. During the next year, the fortunes of the two wealthy Hasidim switched. The one who was very wealthy, his fortunes went down, and the one who wasn't as wealthy, his fortunes went up. So the one who had been very wealthy originally, he sees what happened, and he realizes that the Rebbe is meddling with his finances. He wasn't happy that he didn't give what he was supposed to, so he caused that his finances go down. This other guy stepped up where he didn't, and his finances go up. So he decides he's going to take the Rebbe to Beis Din, so to a Jewish court for meddling with his taking money away from him. So they go to the Reb Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev. He's going to be the judge that they bring it before. So you have they summon the Abderov, and they summon and this chassid, who was previously the very wealthy chassid. And the very wealthy chassid goes first. He tells them what his claims are. And after listening to the wealthy chassid, he turns to the Abderov and he says, do you agree with the facts of what he's saying? And he said, yes. And he says, well, it sounds like he has a claim against you. It does sound like you've somehow taken away his money. So the Abderov said to Reb Levi Yitzchak and to this chassid, he said, let me explain to you how this works. He says, I'm a Rebbe, and part of my responsibility as a Rebbe is the well-being of my Hasidim, which means I'm responsible for their spiritual well-being, but I'm also responsible for their material well-being. And so a lot of money gets sent to me in order to help them, because I'm a channel for HaKadosh Baruch Hu's, shefa for his energy. But I can't be busy handling money all day. I have to be involved with the spiritual and material well-being of my Hasidim. I can't be a banker. So God deposits the money that I'm going to use with certain Hasidim, and they function as a kind of bank. And I called my banker and asked him to give me money, And the banker refused. So I took my money and I put it in a different bank. So that is one of my favorite stories on this topic. Okay. Mitzvah 196.
Rabbi, can you just summarize the story a little bit? I'm a little lost on what happened.
There was a man who approached the Aptarov. He was one of his Hasidim, and he needed money because his daughter was engaged, and it was going to cost a lot of money for a dowry in the wedding.
I understand that.
The Aptarov sent him to one of his Hasidim with a letter instructing that Hasid to give this guy a certain amount of tzedakah. He refused. He sent the letter to a different guy who did not have as much money. That guy complied. During the year, the guy who had a lot of money now had a lot less, and the guy who didn't have as much had a lot more. So that first chassid, the first wealthy chassid, sued the Aptarov in court for messing with his money, for taking away his money. And the Aptarov explained that this money wasn't this guy's money. This money is sent to this guy for the purpose of the Rebbe dispersing it amongst the Hasidim. And this guy, when asked to produce money, refused. So the Aptarov said, I just changed banks. In other words, I asked God to put it with this other chassid because this other chassid is willing to produce the money when the money is needed.
I see. So
this was a Hasidic version of the notion that when we have money for tzedakah, we are channels for, God's plan in the world, and we need to produce it. This also helps people put it into context in a way that's sort of healthy, which, if I think about it, not as my money originally, but it was earmarked already for the poor, let's say 10%, let's say that's the suggested amount that people set aside from their income. So that 10% is not my money. That's money that's sent to me for the purpose of distributing to the poor and the needy. And so it helps me in a kind of healthy way manage my charitable giving, if I think of it that way. So that's just a Hasidic story to illustrate that. Okay. Mitzvah 196. That is that he commanded us to reward a Hebrew slave when he goes free and not to have him leave his owner's domain empty-handed. Okay, so he uses the word in the translation reward. Ahanaka. In modern Hebrew, they still use this word, and it means like a distribution of money. But it does have a sense that you're granting something to somebody who didn't earn it. He didn't earn it. So you might use the term bonus, a bonus. So in this case, this is a bonus. This is an amount of money on top of, let's say the reason this person is a Hebrew slave is because he stole and he can't pay it back. So he's working that off. Whatever that amount was, he's working that off. When he gets to the point of working that off, all he's done is pay what he owes, but he doesn't necessarily have money that will allow for him to move on. You have to have a certain amount of money just to be able to transition out of servitude into freedom. This is talking about a Jewish slave. he's going to be freed, and when he's freed, there's an expectation that he's now going to start a new life. But you have to have something, some financial means to be able to transition. So that's what this person is supposed to give him. V'hu amru hanik tanik lo. So that's why it says you shall bestow upon him this, which is it's going to be something like it's going to be something that's either money or something that could be turned into money. So this mitzvah is explained in the first chapter of Kiddushin. Kiddushin is a tractate that technically deals with the first step of marriage. In biblical Jewish law, there are two steps to marriage. There is Kiddushin, and there is what we call chuppah. That second step the need for a second step may not be biblical. There's some discussion of it, but that's typically how we do weddings. We have the Kiddushin ceremony, which is often translated as betrothal, but it really is marriage, step number one. And then we have what you call chuppah, which is the Sheva Brachos and the part of the ceremony. And that is step number two. The combined step number one and step number two results in a couple that are now going to live together. It used to be that step number one was done and they didn't live together. They were married in the sense that they would need a divorce if it broke up after that, and also that it would be adultery if the wife had a relationship with somebody else. But they are not living together yet. There would be several months during which time everybody would gather the resources for the house, and then there would be the chuppah, and they would begin to live together. So that is Kiddushin. So Kiddushin, because it's step number one, it represents a transition in relationships. They are transitioning from two single people to a marriage unit. That transition is compared and contrasted to other ones. For instance, divorce.
Rabbi,
wasn't
the thing like when they had the thing where you weren't what was the thing we were talking about where it's like not quite married and they have the kedusha. Wasn't that a different type of het, the adultery, than other adultery?
No.
Oh.
No.
I think I remember reading that somewhere or something. It was a different het.
I don't think so, but if you find it, I'm very open to it because I'm often, but I don't think so. Once they're, in other words, the ring ceremony has been drawn. We're not, in modern days, people call engagement betrothal, but we're not talking about engagement. We're talking about the ceremony of Kiddushin, where the husband gives a ring to the wife or money to the wife, and then.
But isn't this done at the wedding?
Nowadays it is, but it used to be two separate ceremonies. Up until modern times, it was done separately. They would do the Kiddushin and then wait several months up to a year, and then they would do the chuppah. It's in modern times we do them both under the chuppah. First we do the Kiddushin, then we read from the ketubah, and then we do the chuppah. The reading from the ketubah is not an essential part of the ceremony, it's done in order to separate the two pieces, which are kedushin and what we call chuppah or sheva brachas. But again, it for much of history, even up until relatively recent times, there were many cultures that had them divided, and that's the way it originally was. Originally, it was divided that way. That's the assumption of the Mishnah and the Gemara, that they're going to do kedushin, they're going to wait several months, and then they're going to do the chuppah. So the reason, in order to understand how this transition works, how do you go from two single people to a married couple, and then so they compare and contrast it with the opposite? How do you go from being a married couple back to being two single people? So there's lots of comparing and contrasting between kedushin and gittin, divorcing. There's also comparison to slavery, because in slavery, somebody transitions. In other words, their status changes, and it is a kind of relationship status change. This person was a free individual with no obligation to work on behalf of somebody else. And then when this person becomes the servant, the Hebrew slave, now they have transitioned to the state of a slave, and there is this relationship between the slave and the owner. So slavery is another one of the situations that gets compared and contrasted with Jewish, compared and contrasted with kedushin. The general understanding is that even in a business relationship, let's say I make a contractual agreement with you, that I build something for you, and then halfway through I decide I'm not going to do it. So
that happens a lot.
Right. So halachically, the guy always can back out. He may have penalties. He may have to pay money when he backs out. But halachically, the person always has the right to back out, because, and they quote the verse from Torah where Hashem says, the Jewish people are servants to me, but they are not servants to anybody else. So, they're not servants to my servants. So, and they're not meant to be. So servitude would mean that you're in a relationship that is different from the interaction between me. And I'm talking about a Hebrew slave. I'm not talking about Gentile slaves. We don't have Gentile slaves nowadays. We're not looking forward to going back to slavery in the future. There's no plans for us to go back to slavery in the future. We're not looking forward to going to slavery in the future. That was something in the past, but that's Gentile slavery. As far as Jewish slavery, there is the distinction between being a Hebrew slave and a Hebrew free person is whether you have the obligation to work for the other person. It would be court imposed. You cannot get out of it. You cannot get out of it. If you're supposed to do the work, if he asks you to do the work, you have to do the work. Maybe there's caveats that it can't be abuse or something like that. But otherwise, you have to do the work. As a free person, you wouldn't have to do the work. That's a transition in status. There's also some other things that are part of the Hebrew slave's condition. One of them is that he can be paired up with a Gentile woman slave. In other words, his master, as a Hebrew slave, his master can pair him up with one of his Gentile slaves, and he could end up having a family with a woman who is a Gentile. And so that's another thing that indicates that there's been some kind of transition or transformation. So again, when you're studying these transitions in status, this means interpersonal relationships, obligations to, financial obligations, etc. This kind of status change, it requires something to make that transition. That something is called a kinyan. We technically translate kinyan as purchase, but it doesn't really mean purchase. It means some kind of demonstration of the acceptance of a transition in relationship. So it could be the relationship between me and an object. So when does the object become mine? The object was yours and now it's mine. When did it become mine? We say when he made a kinyan. The kinyan again could be that I lifted it.
The shorish of that?
It's a noun. Kuf nun. Yud nun is the noun. Kinyan. Liknot is the verb, to acquire. Koneh, kuf nun hey, is the shorish of the verb, kuf nun hey.
Wasn't sure if it was it's right over there. Okay.
Right. Okay. So so that is the area that Tractate Kedushin spends most of its time. And so that's why these laws of an Eved Ivri would be there, because it goes on to talk about even acquiring objects, acquiring real estate, acquiring movable objects, besides focusing on the nature of marriage, the legal underpinnings of some of the legal underpinnings of marriage. Okay, so that is that. And I guess the reason it would be put together with the stuff about poor people is because when this guy leaves your service, he is a poor person. He doesn't have means to make it on his own. So you're supposed to give him a bonus, some kind of chunk of money that he can use to get settled in a new life. So here is another mitzvah, related mitzvah to the tzedakah mitzvah. That is that he commanded us. I'm sorry. I'm going to pause here. We'll next Monday we'll start with the mitzvah to lend to the poor. Thank you for having patience with me. I know it does require a lot of patience. I'm sorry about that. So I'm going to be in St. Louis. I'm going Tuesday, coming back Wednesday. So for our Thursday class, we're going to meet on Thursday. We're not meeting tomorrow night's class. The Tuesday night class is not meeting. I'm going to send out an email about that. And I don't know if there's more housekeeping. Again, thank you. Be well, guys.
Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi.
Bye,
Have
Rabbi.
a good trip.
Thank you.
Good trip.
Hey, Jacob.
Mm-hmm.
Hey. Be well.